This is Ken Pyle with VOD TV. We're at the Independent Show. We're with Mike Grebb of CableFAX. CableFAX, of course, an industry voice of what's going on. And what is going on here at the Independent Show?
Well, it was an interesting day yesterday. I mean, on Monday, Michael Wilner was here. He's obviously somebody who's been in the industry a long time. He lived through the 1992 Cable Act, as many people here lived through, and sort of subsequent legislation. So he had a lot of warnings about going to Washington and watching what you ask for, and because you may get more than you thought you'd get. And it was an interesting point. I think, you know, the ACA obviously has been pushing very heavy, very hard on retrans reform, which is an important thing for the small and mid-sized operators because they're really running into a lot of problems with the broadcasters. And, you know, I think the warnings are valid, but I think also that the ACA has a pretty good reputation in Washington right now, pretty credible organization. So if I was going to take the risk that you might have unintended consequences, which is always a risk, and Matt Polka would say that is always a risk. I think it's good to have people like that behind you. I think, you know, the industry is probably the small and mid-sized operators probably in very good hands with those guys. Yeah.
Well, in retransmission, you touched upon that, and of course Matt would too. But and you've been following this much closer than I. The CBS Time-Warner.
Yes, a lot of fun. That was one of the craziest retrans fights. Last night, basically, they took them off the air for a few minutes, or supposedly took them off the air, then they put them back on. They kept extending the deadline. You know, it went to 8 o'clock, then it was 9 o'clock, then it was midnight, then they took it off, then they put it back on. It's just I mean, it's this whole retrans thing is just, it's gotten insane. I mean, for both sides, and without blaming one side or the other, it's just kind of crazy and ridiculous. And I think that the consumers look at how far these fights are going, and the fact that it just gets to the brink like that every single time and more often. Even though most deals eventually get made, it's all the press around it and everything. It just isn't probably good for anyone. But I think, as somebody mentioned yesterday on one of the panels here today at the Indy Show, you know, in some ways it reflects worse sometimes on the broadcasters. I think because the cable operators, some of the smaller and mid-sized ones, are the ones asking for reforms. When you have this continual brinkmanship, it sometimes reflects worse on the broadcasters who want everything, who are trying to say everything's great. Right. You know, everything's perfect the way it is. We don't need to change anything. So when you see these kind of fights devolving into that sort of thing, it probably hurts the broadcast side more. So in some ways, it's kind of ironic. It kind of helps cable a little bit when they have these fights.
Well, it's interesting because then you've got in the background, kind of underneath all this is this Aereo, and is that having an influence on the retransmission consent from your viewpoint?
Well, yes, because if Aereo wins all of their cases, you know, and that eventually is okay for what they're doing, which is a very interesting kind of, they found a loophole, and they're using it, and so technically what they're doing seems to be legal, but you know, the other side is saying, well, yeah, but it's not in the spirit of the law and that sort of thing, or we need to change the law to make sure to close this loophole. If they actually win that case, the cable operators could turn around and say, we're not doing retrans anymore, we'll just put up all these little antennas, and we'll just do it ourselves, and that would be much cheaper than paying, you know, $1 or 50 cents or whatever they're paying to the large broadcasters. So the economics would work out a lot better for the cable industry, but you know, that case is far from over yet, so we'll have to see how it comes out.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate catching up with you here, and I look forward to further conversations as we go.
All right, well, great. Thanks.
Mike.
Thanks.